Okay. Thank you everyone for being here, both online and in the room. This is the Rulemaking Advisory Committee for the implementation by building codes of Senate Bill 762, which is creating fire hardening provisions in the building code for high and extreme wildfire risk zones. Hope everyone's here for that, because if you're not, you're in the wrong place. But assuming that everyone is, I'm going to get started here with basically just going down the list of folks that I have RSVP'd. And if I call your name, just do me a favor. And if you're here, say that you're here and who you represent. If you are not here, stay silent. And if I get to the end of the list, I'm assuming there'll be a few people on the list that are here that were not RSVP'd, and that's fine. I'll just have you run down. We'll just run down the list of folks that are here, but we're not on the list to start out with, just so that we know everyone that's here and who's represented here. Okay, starting down my list, I have John Webster. Okay. Not hearing John. If you're on mute, John, one more chance. Okay, and if you come in at the end, that's fine too. We got Rose Herrera. Okay, I'm not hearing Rose, but I know I saw Steve already. He's here in the room with me. So Steve Strawn, you want to give a test to that microphone right there and just let us know who you are here representing, and you're gonna click it on first. Perfect.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here in person. I'm Steve Strawn from Geldwin Windows and Doors.
Thank you, Steve. David Tyree. I'm not hearing David. Doug Eaglebear.
Hello, I'm here. I'm online. I'm here representing Northwest Rebuild Project, a nonprofit assisting people who've lost their homes in wildfire.
Thank you, Doug. Grant Muller. Good. Gonna flip my microphone on.
Well, hi there. Testing.
There you go.
Yeah, my name is Grant Muller. I'm with the Vision Fenestration or Vision Extrusion. I'm also representing the FTIA Fenestration Glass Industry Association as well.
Thank you. Do you mind switching that off really quick? Otherwise, we might end up with an echoing situation, and nobody wants that. Thank you. Okay, I have, is it Corrine Arendes? Sorry about that. Still apologize even if you're not here, but if you're on mute, feel free to jump in. Okay, I'm pretty sure I saw Terry Whitehill.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Can. You're gonna go ahead and say who you represent.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I can turn my video on too. Well, I can try. I'm Terry Whitehill. I'm the building official for the city of Portland.
Thank you, Terry. Kim Cosmos. Okay, I'm not hearing Kim. Scott Berry. Okay, I'm not hearing Scott. Douglas Morgan.
I'm here representing City of Portland Development Services.
Thank you, Douglas. Trask Hodgson.
Trask Hodgson, Community Wildfire Forester with ODF.
Thank you, Trask. Ted Zook. I think you're on mute, Ted.
Two buttons, huh? Ted Zook, building official in Jackson County, but I am actually here representing Oregon Building Officials Association.
Thank you, Ted. And Faye Taylor. I think you're on mute, Faye.
I'm here and I'm the coordinator of the Mount Bachelor Village Firewires Committee.
Great, thanks for coming. All right, that is everyone I have on my list. If there's someone who I didn't call who would still like to participate, we'll go ahead and state your name and who, if anyone, you're representing now. And we'll go on to maybe a hand raise process, since I think we have one person in the room that may or may not be participating, and then maybe some folks online as well. Let's start with the person in the room, since I can see them right in front of me.
First, I'll mention that my father built windows for you guys for about 10 years in Klamath Falls. So, my name is Daryl Fuller. I'm here representing the Oregon State Association of Plumbing, Heating, and Cooling Contractors, the Oregon On-Site Wastewater Association, which are the septic industry folks, and Professional Land Surveyors of Oregon, but just mostly here as a survey. Thanks.
Next up. I see a hand from Tanner Farrington.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Tanner Farrington, past president representing Oregon Fire Marshals Association. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Chris Chambers.
Good afternoon, Chris Chambers, Wildfire Division Chief at Ashland Fire and Rescue, representing the city of Ashland.
Thanks, Chris. See Sadie Carney.
Good afternoon, Sadie Carney. I use she, her pronouns. I am a policy coordinator and communications manager with the Department of Land Conservation and Development.
Thanks, Sadie. And I'm going off of the participants list that we have on the side here. So I see a Kay Stevenson.
Yes, Craig Stevenson, International Code Council, Government Relations.
Thank you. And Chad Hawkins.
Yeah, good afternoon. Chad Hawkins, Assistant Chief Deputy State Fire Marshal, representing the Oregon Office of State Fire Marshal.
Thank you. And then I see what might be Rick L.
Yes, hi, Rick Lappin. I'm the Code Compliance Officer with Fiber Composites, manufacturer of wood composite decking primarily.
And Paul Anderes.
Good afternoon, Paul Andrus, Union County Commissioner, and I apologize in advance. I'm not going to be able to stay the entire meeting.
Don't worry about it, Paul. Thank you. Okay, that is all of the hands I see. If there's anybody else that has not had a chance to introduce themselves, I'd encourage you to do so now. If you end up deciding that you want to, oh, I see one more. Scott Edelman.
Hi, I'm Scott Edelman, the Jefferson County Community Development Director.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, I realized I rudely forgot to introduce myself up front. I am Andy Bolton. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with the Building Codes Division. We have some other staff here that are available to help as well. To my right, we have our administrator, Alana Cox. Off screen, where you cannot see her, you have Laura Burns, who is facilitating a lot of this technically, and we couldn't do it without her. And then virtually, we have sort of the code experts that are here to jump in when I don't know what I'm talking about. That is Tony Rocco and Eric McMullen. And that is the staff we have here on hand to help facilitate this meeting. I'm going to go into a little bit of background right now, which is going to involve reading something that was sent out to all of you. So it's the same information that was sent out, but I'm going to go through the background to sort of the how we got here of this meeting before we sort of dive into the issues that we're all going to discuss. In 2019, the division added section R327 to the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, ORSC. Section R327 of the ORSC includes wildfire hazard mitigation standards that can help make a building more resistant to damage from wildfire. These standards include items like more ignition or heat resistant building materials and construction methods and materials that resist ember intrusion. The section was not required statewide because there was no clear criteria to determine where it should apply, but was instead made available for local adoption, which allowed local jurisdictions to adopt section R327 and make its wildfire hazard mitigation standards mandatory in wildfire risk zones they identified within that jurisdiction. Senate Bill 762 passed the Oregon legislature during the 2021 legislative session and was signed into law by the governor. SB 762 was an omnibus bill relating to many different aspects of wildfire preparation, prevention, and mitigation, and it included directives for several Oregon agencies. The sections of the bill that addressed fire hardening requirements and that necessitated this rulemaking were sections 12, 12A, and 12B, and they were added to the Oregon Revised Statutes at 455.612. The law requires the director of DCBS, that's Department of Consumer and Business Services, if folks are keeping score at home, to amend the ORSC. The amendments must change the scope of section R327's wildfire hazard mitigation standards from just being available for local adoption to being required for new construction in high and extreme wildfire risk zones in the wildland urban interface. Both the wildfire risk zones and the wildland urban interface are required to be defined and mapped by other agencies. Additionally, the law directs the department to amend section R327 of the ORSC to include standards for additions to existing dwellings and for replacement of existing exterior elements covered by section R327. The code amendments are required to be enacted no later than October 1, 2022, and mandatory no earlier than April 1, 2023. Creating a phase-in period for the code provisions. During this meeting, we'll discuss rulemaking issues relating to the implementation of ORS 455.612. These issues are listed in this packet. After we get through that list, there will be an opportunity for you to address any additional issues that you believe the division should consider in this rulemaking. Also, if you have comments you would like to submit after this meeting is over, please send them to rulescoordinator.bcd@dcbs.oregon.gov. And that email address is in that packet that was sent out to all of you, so you don't necessarily have to copy it down as I'm saying it. Please send those comments to us no later than June 17th, which is next Friday. And 5 p.m., end of day, June 17th. I mentioned that we'll be sort of circling back at the end for any additional topics that you think we either did not include or should have included, or something that you think you want to circle back to on a previous issue. Sort of the corollary to that is, while we don't have a specific timeline to set a specific amount of time for each issue, if it starts seeming like we're spending so much time on one issue that we can't make it to the rest of them, I may move us along to the next issue and then circle back if we end up having time at the end, because I do want to make sure we get through all 4 of the issues that we're trying to discuss today. With that said, is there any sort of, I think I see a hand from Scott Edelman. Is that still from the introduction, Scott? I haven't been looking at the computer screen enough. Okay, before I get started, just jumping right into issue 1, I wanted to check both virtually and in the room here if there's any questions about format or how this meeting is going to run. Otherwise, I'll just jump right in and we'll get started. Okay, I'm not seeing any, but if something comes up during this whole process, feel free to either raise your hands if you're in the virtual world or just wave at me, or really just raise your hands wherever you are. Okay, so our first issue is, does the proposed rulemaking fulfill the requirements of the legislation? The intent of this rulemaking and the associated code amendment is to implement the requirements of ORS 455.612. The statute requires that the ORSC be amended. The amendment must change the scope of section R327 from one that is available for local adoption to one that is required for new construction in high and extreme wildfire risk zones of the wildland urban interface, while the amendments must include, excuse me, I'm going to start that sentence over. I apologize. Also, the amendments must include standards for additions to existing dwellings and accessory structures, and for replacement of existing exterior elements covered in section R327 by the ORSC. The division welcomes feedback from the committee on whether the proposed code amendments and the rule language adopting them that are attached at the end of this packet adequately fulfill the requirements of ORS 455 612. And we have some options here just sort of to prompt discussions. It could be that the proposed rulemaking does appropriately implement the legislation, or it could be that you think that there needs to be changes in order to implement the legislation appropriately. Now I'm going to sort of kick us off into sort of what is generally a little bit more of a freewheeling discussion. There's not really parliamentary rules of procedure here to keep things going in a somewhat ordered fashion to the extent that we can use the raised hand function, or again, raise your hand if you're in the room. That is helpful. But that's more of something that just helps keep the conversation going in an orderly fashion and less about Robert's rules of procedure or whatever we might be following. So is there anybody that has any thoughts on this first issue? And I saw Faye Taylor first. So you're up first, Faye.
Well, my concern is that I think the legislature, if I understand it, wanted this rules to apply to existing structures when the exterior elements were replaced. And I believe that the language in the code will allow anyone that doesn't want to apply to avoid it, because it says the elements have to be replaced in their entirety. And I'm a retired attorney, and when I see entirety, I know that, you don't have to apply if you only do 99%. And it's just an open door for evasion.
Thank you, Faye. Yep, I got someone in the room here.
Steve Strawn, that's an interesting question. So does this apply then when when a permit is pulled for renovation, alteration, new building, whatever it is, wherever a permit is pulled, you would be compelled to comply with this code rather than just an arbitrary change out without going through the official process?
I'm going to have Tony jump in here if I am about to say something incorrect. But if he doesn't jump in, then in order to be, once this is fully implemented and mandatory, in order to be up to code in a high and extreme wildfire risk zone, when you're doing new construction, when you're doing construction to the building, it will need to be built, whatever you're building will need to be built to these, the R327 standard. Yeah.
Correct. And just to add to that, Andy, the provisions don't create any new permitting requirements. So in R1052 of the existing ORSC, there are exemptions from permitting for certain activities such as retrofitting windows, window replacement, siding replacement, and things of that nature. So this does not change or introduce new permitting requirements that did not exist previously.
Can I jump in, Andy? So this is Alana Cox, Administrator of the Building Codes Division, and two great issues raised already. So thank you for the feedback. Tony, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to our thinking around the replaced in their entirety in terms of the performance of some of these items. But this is an area where we do have some flexibility because this is the kind of the new part of the code making here. So really interested in feedback. And I think the 99% is not what we're intending to capture. I think the intent was that if you replace, for example, the siding on one side of your house, that siding won't perform well if it's combined with another kind of siding. And maybe Tony can say that better than me, but that was our thinking, but maybe there's a different threshold that would make more sense.
Sure. Thanks, Alana. I think Alana made the great point there. It's about, performance of materials and mixing materials, and then also just standard repair activity, right? So what if we had a little bit of dry rotted siding and we're going to replace, 2 panels on the corner? Does it make sense then to fully change the siding material in that instance for an ordinary kind of maintenance repair activity? So we were just picking a line there to try to make it a clear line for application to provide some predictability to folks. But again, as Alana noted, I think that's why we're having this meeting to gain some feedback on that.
Thanks, Tony. I see Tanner Farrington, and then I got Terry Whitehill on deck.
Thank you very much. Tanner Farrington, representing Oregon Fire Marshals Association. First, to build on Faye's comments and Tony's comments. One thing that popped into my mind with that same language, in their entirety, is I think there's going to be funding available for kind of prioritizing efforts. So not only what BCD is doing, but prioritizing where funding goes. And so I think what we could end up with is potentially siting being replaced just on one side, or maybe kind of phased in. People attack it in chunks, I guess, for lack of a better term. Maybe with the goal, kind of the common goal of consistency. Maybe one solution would be to add some language in to where if materials are replaced, they shall be per R327. So if the goal is to replace materials to provide wildfire mitigation, do it according with this section. So building that consistency and that path, I guess, to doing part of a structure. I'm not exactly sure what that language should look like, but just wanted to throw that out there. I saw kind of some potential issues with that probably weren't necessarily intended. The second topic was so I didn't realize this until yesterday in a different meeting, but the way the rules appear to be written is R327 would change from a kind of a may to a shall, and would apply based on the map. So in high and extreme areas, just in this statewide map. There's been discussion and kind of the understanding in the ODF RAC meetings was local jurisdictions would continue to be able to have mapped areas that are not less restrictive, but potentially more restrictive. So, local communities know areas that they have issues commonly with fire. Obviously, that would need to be a consistent process, but if a local community decides to identify areas where there is higher wildfire risk than what the state map potentially shows, I think those communities would also like to have the opportunity to apply 327, kind of like is done currently. So as an example, Ashland, they've got a mapped area that could be more restrictive, for lack of better words, than the state map that's going to be coming out. They've got a program that they've got going where they apply 327 in those areas. And that was done based on a community involved process with buy-in from the community. So that community really supports that program. So for communities like that, it would be nice to add some language that makes it a shall for the statewide map, which I think is appropriate for 762. But then maybe add some language that says if a local community has areas that are identified as high wildfire risk and mitigation, wildfire mitigation through construction materials is completed, do it per 327. So kind of create that additional path for that for those local communities. Because I think with the way this is set up, it's going to do two things. It's going to potentially walk back some of the efforts in local communities. And then additionally, if the map comes out and there's communities that identify, hey, we've got areas based on fire experience that we know are in the WUI and have high risk, we want to be able to apply something when people are doing construction wildfire mitigation. So just a couple of comments there. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanner. This is Alana again from Building Codes, another kind of important issue to get on the table. And I think this is where there's a distinction between the fire code and the building code in terms of that mini maxi. And my understanding is that the fire code allows you to exceed the base standard locally. The building code generally does not. And, this issue was discussed during the deliberations on the bill. And my thinking is that by applying it based on the map, it really takes the same approach that we take with other risk issues in the code, like snow load and wind load, seismic, that you have a consistent methodology for determining that risk. And that's kind of clear from the beginning. We do have a couple of communities for whom that may be a change. Once we see the map, I think we'll have a better understanding of what that looks like. Anyway, that's kind of a little more about our thinking around the application. I think the intent was to replace the local adoption methodology with the map risk methodology. But if the map comes out and it's way out of alignment with folks' expectations in those two communities that have adopted R327 locally, we can take a look at that. So that's just our thinking there, a little more context. Thank you for thanks for the feedback as well on the alterations.
Okay, thank you. And that's good background to have. Definitely appreciate that. I was curious, what's the timeline on adopting this? I think the map's supposed to come out July 1. So it sounds like there'll be a little bit of time to kind of take a look at the map, see how that looks, and then maybe kind of consider how that might affect those communities.
Exactly right. Sorry, Andy knows too. I should have let him say, but I can't help myself. But so Alana again from the division. That's exactly right. So we wanted to have this meeting to kind of get the issues on the table and get the conversation moving ahead of the map coming out. We have proposed that this would go to the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board in mid-July. But we have some flexibility there because ultimately the rulemaking needs to be adopted by October 1. So and it takes about 49 days to do rulemaking. So we've got some cushion if things don't kind of go as planned. But right now, that's our plan. That this code package will need to be approved by the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board before we can go into rulemaking. So we wanted to give ourselves sufficient time in case anything crazy happens, basically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanner. Thank you, Alana. And the less talking I have to do, the better. So jump in whenever you would like. Terry, I got you up next. And I believe Chris Chambers was next. I apologize, Kay Stevenson, if I swapped those. We're just going to go in that order for right now. Go ahead, Terry.
Hi. Hey, Alana. Yeah. Let's see. Nope. Can you hear me? Hey, what are the two communities that have adopted 327?
Ashland and Medford, I believe.
Okay. Because we have something that predated all this, where we had some areas that our fire bureau had deemed hazardous, and we do also some requirements. But we've been doing that for a long time. But that's part of our concern. Historically, what I can tell you is that if you have requirements but there's no enforcement on them, or there's a little way out, there's not going to be much. The only thing that'll really get people to change is if you're providing those incentives that will help to finance the construction. We've had a lot of some of our seismic requirement triggers that it's amazing the lengths that everybody will go to avoid doing them. And I just worry that could be a problem with these requirements also, where you, as was brought up, leave one board and you don't have to follow them. And then there's no permitting required. So, because basically siding and roofing, you don't need it. And so how will you even know if people did what they were supposed to or got the right screens in place? So that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. I see Tony came on. Maybe my understanding is that roofing would require a permit, that's already in the code for our roofing and wildfire areas requirements. But it's it's an issue we've kind of debated too. I think the other side of the coin is we want people to voluntarily upgrade their siding and their windows. And if you create a permitting requirement, that's some cost, right? That gets added on to doing those projects. And they're, whether the extent to which there could be a value added inspection on those items, kind of gets to the reason they don't require a permit as it is. So that was kind of the other side, is we don't want to make it more costly for people to do the right thing and try to make their homes more fire resistant. So that was kind of the debate we were having on that issue.
Thank you, Terry. Got Chris Chambers up next, followed by Kay Stevenson.
Thank you. Well, it's going to come as no surprise, but my testimony is going to be on this one. I just want to have it on the record. Ashland, as being one of the communities who has previously adopted R327 and gone through the prescribed process, we believe that the intent of 762 was not to roll back that on communities and punish them for having done this adoption and done the good work already. So I encourage the committee to, and we will see what happens with the mapping. Perhaps Ashland ends up all extreme or a combination of high and extreme, and then it's kind of a moot point. But having language in there for both Medford and Ashland that would grandfather us in as previous adopters and early adopters is certainly much appreciated, and would cut off any issues no matter what happens with the mapping. So appreciate your attention to that. And I've already heard the comment on it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Kay Stevenson, then Douglas Morgan.
Thank you very much, Craig Stevenson, representing the International Code Council. I've been familiar with the Oregon codes for quite some time and understand why you have the section 327. You like to have enrolled codes where everything is accessible under one document, and that's what was previously accomplished with this House Bill 762. It's very clear that the policymakers in the legislature wanted to address extreme and high conditions. And one of the things that I ponder about, and for the consideration as these rules go forward, is to be consistent with the type of ignition resistant construction that serves high and extreme hazards. With that, one of the things that I note is the Class B roofing is inconsistent, where I know you don't have delineation of ignition resistant 1, 2, or 3 like the model code. You've all kind of put it together so it's one set of easy to apply rules. But that would be one thing that I would ask the appropriate committee to consider, that the roof classification be examined, that which is required under the new 2021 Wildland Code for the Class A roofing, which is for ignition resistance 2 and ignition resistance 1. That'd be more consistent with high and extreme requirements. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thanks, Craig. Douglas Morgan, followed by Ted Zook.
Hi, thank you. I was going to say that I think the rulemaking does meet the letter of the legislation, but I was going to make a similar comment that Faye and others have spoken to about the exception created by using that phrasing replaced in their entirety. I do think that's problematic. If the intent is to try to address the issue of repair work and that kind of thing, there is exception 2 under that section that addresses that. And if there's a desire to extend that a little bit further beyond repair to some limited amount of replacement or partial replacement, perhaps that could be worked into that exception number 2. And that would be a better approach in my mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Douglas. Ted?
Okay, I think I got both buttons that time. Well, mine are more questions than comments, I guess. And the question was whether it complies with the intent of 762. One of the things that kind of jumped out me was the exception, and this is coming, I believe, from the WUI code when it came into R327, but it was the exception that subdivisions, and there was some added language about 50%. If it's less than 50% was built up, that the rest of the new construction does not need to comply. And to the question whether that meets the intent of 762, I guess I'm not sure on that. And one of the reasons I bring that up, and it's probably a little premature because we don't have the mapping yet, is we don't know how many subdivisions there will be and how far this mapping is going to go into things like UGBs, where there may be subdivisions that have 51% done. The wildfires that, the Labor Day wildfires that came through in 2020, as you know, devastated Phoenix town and, parts of unincorporated county. And a lot of those were subdivisions. So just some food for thought, not necessarily a stance one way or the other. The other thing, just to address something that Craig said about the class A and B roofing. My understanding is that they're tested to ASTM 108, and that's a standard that is on the entire assembly, not necessarily the roofing membrane. I know we have language in the ORSC on what classifies as Class A and Class B. But another consideration is the Labor Day fires that came through. We were talking wind speeds in excess of 35. I believe the standard for the ASTM was only 12 miles per hour. So I guess, what Craig had said about the difference between the extreme or high areas, what really differentiates the difference between those two, if we're talking that the same roofing could be used in both areas. And I guess that's it. Just comments from the peanut gallery.
Thanks, Ted. This is Alana again. So on the infill exception, just to provide a little more context there, this is another, kind of how to transition into this new code world was part of the discussion around the bill. And there's some language specifically in the bill that is not particularly clear, but my understanding is that the intent is to address the scoping limitation. And it says not more than 2 years after we adopt the standards, we should take another look and make sure that the code incorporates the standards and that we make any necessary adjustments to the applicability of the standards and permitting requirements. And so my understanding was basically that the intent was that for these first 2 years, we would keep that infill exception that would give an opportunity if building slows down and you have that situation where you're kind of selling off portions of subdivisions or whatever, that would allow a transition, or it will become moot very fast. And again, we'll kind of see the map, but our intention was that we would peel that out as part of that 2-year exercise, but keep it in for the first 2 years. So just to provide a little more context. And on the Class A and B roof question, another good issue that's been raised, you'll notice all of the kind of color excitement happens on page 1 of the code. And that's because the bill was pretty specific that the construction standards should be R327 as they're already adopted. So the changes we're making are around those exterior elements and the scoping. So I don't think there's an opportunity here from my view to change the actual construction standards themselves. Although it's a fair and debatable point what the appropriate roof class should be.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alana. Thanks, Ted. So I don't have anybody else with hands raised either in the room or on the Zoom right now. Is there anybody else that would like to jump in on issue 1 before we move on to issue 2, knowing full well that if we have time at the end, we can definitely circle back to issue 1 if somebody thinks of something between now and then. All right, Terry.
Yeah, hey, the one thing I wanted to bring up is that when I look at that about the 50%, if you had a lot that the house that was on there burned down, and then they built a new house, they just scraped it and built something totally different there. The way that's written, I'm not so sure you could ask them to do the requirements of this section. So you might want to put something in that somehow says, if the houses in that subdivision are burned down, then they need to build them back using those requirements. Because all of a sudden you could have an empty lot and still have 50% of the subdivision didn't burn down.
Okay, food for thought. Thanks, Terry. We'll take a look at that.
Yep.
Okay, I don't want to let us sit with too much dead air here since we still got stuff to cover. So I'm going to move on to issue 2, but at the end, if you want to circle back, if you think of something on issue 1, feel free to let us know. Alternatively, if you think of it tomorrow, send us an email and send us that way. Because like I said, written comments accepted until the end of the day on next Friday. But issue 2, are the amendments sufficiently clear? It is always the division's goal for rulemaking and code amendments to be as clear and understandable as possible while maintaining the technical accuracy of the code. The division has prepared proposed code language and rule language that is intended to fulfill the requirements of the new law, taking into account additional feedback that may have been received on the previous issue. The division welcomes feedback from the committee on the clarity of the proposed rule language and the clarity of the proposed code language. Again, there's some options here. These are mostly intended as sort of touching off points in terms of the discussion. But similar to before, some of the options would be proposed language is sufficiently clear and understandable, or there is a way in which the proposed language could be changed to improve its clarity. And we'd be open to any suggestions that you may have on that. Okay, Tanner.
Hey, thank you. My question is on the subdivision infill exception. I'll just say real quickly, I kind of agree with some of the other concerns that it may not be in line with 762 and that it's probably going to lead to fewer houses with 327. But on clarity, the last line, the calculations of 50% is based on lots in the subdivision that are within higher extreme. That seems to be language that makes sense to get in line with 762. My hunch is what that language means is that if you've got a subdivision with 120 houses or 120 lots and 100 of them are either in higher extreme, those are the lots that you look at for the 50% rule. But the other way that language could be read is you look at the subdivision overall and then you only count up the ones that are in higher extreme. So you take that number out of the total number of the subdivision. So
we had some fun whiteboarding this one, Tanner.
Yeah.
This is Alana again. What we're trying to say, and I'm glad you brought it up because I don't know if it's perfect. What we wanted to avoid is, let's say you have a subdivision where 60 of the lots are in moderate, and then the other 40 are in higher extreme. We didn't want you to use those 60 lots that are outside of the regulated area to determine that you don't have to do the 40 that are in. Does that make sense? So we were trying to make sure that if the subdivision is split, that you're not including those ones that aren't required to do it in your calculation of whether you need to do it. I don't know that I made that any clearer. And does that make sense?
It does to me. And the first time I read it wrong and didn't really understand it. And then I read it again and landed on what you just said, but maybe a little bit more clarity would help, or even like an example would help. And that couldn't even be outside the code, just kind of some sort of follow-up that helps people kind of understand what that language means. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I got to follow up.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So, and this is probably a really unlikely scenario. Take Medford or Ashland. Existing development was constructed under local use of 327. So because it was constructed under 327, applying this new section and the 50% rule, would that still apply? Or does this new section only apply if it's built under this version of R327 related to the statewide map?
That's a good question. I would think that it would include those that were built to R327 under local adoption, but Tony, correct me if you disagree.
No, I agree, absolutely. It's really just trying to capture whether they were built to those wildfire mitigation standards or not. So if that was through the local ordinance at that time, then that would qualify.
Thank you.
Thank you. One thing I really want to make a quick note of, and maybe I can put one look over to the tech crew over here to make sure this is still accurate. But at one point, at least, I believe that the Zoom chat is not actually going to become part of the record on this. So I've seen a couple of chats pop up, and if you're just communicating with other people on the chat, that's fine. I'm not trying to dissuade that, but if you actually, like, it won't necessarily become part of the record for this meeting. So if there's something that you really want to bring up, I would not necessarily rely on the chat to do that. I would either raise a hand. I don't necessarily want to force you to the forefront if you're not comfortable speaking. But if you are, feel free to raise a hand and just sort of say what you were going to put in the chat. Or if you want to give it to us in a written comment after the fact, that's fine too. I just didn't want folks to think that the chat was going to become part of the final record when really it kind of goes away when the Zoom closes. All right, I'm not seeing any other hands. If there's anybody that would like to speak to the clarity of either the code language or the rule language, feel free. Douglas.
This might be a bit of a picky issue, but nonetheless, it's code language, so it might make a difference. In section R327.2, the application section, there's a couple items in there where the term high and extreme wildfire risk classes is used. I think that should probably be high or extreme. A lot probably can't be in both at the same time. So it should be an or statement. I'm no English major either though, so.
As an English major, thank you for that feedback. Good point. I like easy things to fix.
Glad I can help.
Thanks, Douglas. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody jumping up at the opportunity to speak more on clarity, but again, just like with everything else, we can circle back to this if we want, but I'm going to keep us moving forward if nobody else is chomping at the bit here. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to, just in time, Sadie.
Sorry, I think not having seen the map, my understanding of it is that a lot could be in both high and extreme and in moderate and in none, depending on the size of the lot or parcel. And so maybe I hate to use an and or as a former English major myself, because I feel that does lack clarity, but I don't think that the map is addressing, it is at the parcel scale, but the map does not sweep in a parcel into a single category of higher extreme. Maybe Tanner has more information on this. I just wanted to call out my limited understanding at this point.
Thank you, Sadie. Tanner?
My understanding is we built language in to say, because there's basically the way it works is there's pixels, right? I think it's 100 by 100 pixels. So you look at property on the pixel level. And so to Sadie's point, that's exactly correct. You could have partially in moderate, partially in high, partially extreme on the same parcel. My understanding is whatever the majority is, that parcel reflects that it gets looked at that overall level. So whatever the majority of the property is at, that's what it's classified as. That's the risk hazard classification. I believe that's correct. I'll have to go back and verify that in the ODF language.
May I offer? So I had pretty detailed conversation with Chris Dunn from Oregon State University about the map a couple weeks ago. And I think that is correct for the risk classification, but not for the WUI. And so I need to think through it, because this applies only to areas that are within the WUI, right?
Yes.
Right, okay.
So it has to be in high and extreme and within in the WUI, because yes, sorry, I didn't understand your question. Yeah, so they're mapping the whole state for those risk classifications. But if it's not also within the WUI, then the defensible space and home learning would apply.
So if a building permit was filed for an area that was outside the WUI on a parcel that was a mix of high or extreme, it wouldn't, these building standards wouldn't apply because these are only in the WUI.
Correct. If you're in high or extreme and outside the WUI, it does not apply. And thank you for the feedback. Maybe I'll just raise another wrinkle here. So the map should be out in the next couple weeks, and then we are going to turn that map into a tool that's going to look a lot like a map. That's another thing we were asked to do in the bill. And so insofar as we can clarify these split property issues in that tool so that the tool tells you what your requirements are, that's our intention. We'll see if we can get it done this summer, but that's the intention, is that you would be able to clearly go to your address and say, okay, yes, I need to comply, or no, I do not. So we'll have an opportunity to take another run at it that way. I don't know if that clarifies or confuses, but.
Thank you. Anything else, Tanner?
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick make sure that I had good understanding of the infill exception. So 100 lot, just to make the math easy, 100 lot subdivision based on the 50% rule, if 50 or more, so 50, 51, 52, if 50 or more of the lots were not constructed under R327, the rest of them would not be. So as long as 50 or more were not, yeah, the rest wouldn't have to be. The other 50 or 49 or 48 would not have to meet 327, the way this is written. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the intention is that these subdivisions that are in midstream will be built out, and then that will become moot. So it's just kind of to create a longer transition for those subdivisions that are getting built out. Now, I think if construction keeps on going at the pace that it's going right now, it's going to be moot like immediately. But if, we hit a brick wall on the construction economy and construction stops on some of these subdivisions, then it may come into play. So that's where they gave us some time in the bill, that 2-year period for a look back at that provision. But yes, that's the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chad.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Just had a quick question for Alana and company. With the, rebuilding efforts we've been seeing across the state since the 2020 wildfires, and in the unfortunate event that there are additional wildfires in the future, how do you see a multi-hundred, home loss, for example, type situation, and the rebuilding if they're in the high and extreme, with that 50% lot development or 50% development conversation? Because I believe there's still some language that allows them to rebuild to the previous standard, and I just wanted to know how that may or may not be addressed with 327. Thank you.
Hey, Chad, thanks for the question. It's something we've been thinking about. So for those of you who may recall, the code allows you to look back to original code, but then to do a designated list of safety items that have to be to current code, and then energy efficiency to the maximum extent feasible. It's really getting at partial losses, that whole approach. If, a branch falls through your bedroom, then you shouldn't have to tear down your house to build thicker walls to fit more insulation. But I think some clarity specific to fire hardening and maybe including that in that list of safety measures that need to be to current code is something we've been thinking about, and maybe looking at that as part of our 2023 residential code adoption package, kind of in that scoping where we look at the provisions that you need to do to current code. But we want to make sure it still makes sense in the context of that branch falling through your window, because the code doesn't make a distinction really between a total loss and a partial loss on damage repair. So that's where we want to make sure we're thoughtful about it.
No, really appreciate that answer, Alana. And I know we were participants in helping create that list. So just continued partnership. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna go down the road again if I'm not seeing any hands in the room or on the Zoom. So I'm gonna slowly but surely move on to issue 3 unless someone jumps in here again. Okay, not seeing anybody. Issue 3, what are the potential fiscal and economic impacts of this rulemaking? With any rulemaking, the division is required to make a particular note of potential fiscal and economic impacts that might result from the new rules. The division is requesting input from the committee on the nature and extent of any fiscal or economic impact that may be caused by this rule. Some examples of potential fiscal and economic impact would be additional costs or requirements on local municipalities, additional costs or requirements on particular types of businesses. If the new rule will require additional training to implement, comply with, or enforce. If the new rule will make particular actions or products more or less expensive. This is just a list of some examples. Any thoughts on fiscal impact or economic impact that go beyond the items detailed in this list are welcome. When the division adopted section R327 into the ORSC in 2019, it prepared a statement of the fiscal and economic impact on the proposed rulemaking. The full statement is included at the end of your packet as an attachment. But the primary conclusion was that the division estimated at the time that in jurisdictions where R327 was adopted as mandatory, the cost of a typical 1,200 square foot detached single family dwelling would increase by approximately $2,500 to $3,000. Does anyone have any thoughts on what the potential fiscal or economic impact of this rulemaking might be? All right, we have someone in the room.
Good afternoon, Darrell Fuller. I just for the sake of having it on the record, express a degree of frustration from the folks that I work with that we're both being, and this doesn't happen a lot in the, I think the wildland urban interface, but we're being asked to create more affordable housing while you increase the cost of housing through state rules. And at some point, it would be really cool if the state would choose one or the other. Thank you.
Thank you.
We really welcome input on this. This is an important part of kind of noticing the rule.
No, it would not. In fact, the proposed language that I'm offering to this body does not include a cost increase. In fact, it may actually be a cost decrease because there's at least clarity to the code, so there's no mistake what would be required. So from our end, I don't believe that there would be any additional cost at all. So
thank you, Tanner.
Thank you again. So just a couple of comments on this. I think it depends on the location. So if you're looking at kind of an average, not that there's any 1,200 square foot houses being built, or a lot of them anyway, but what we see locally, what a lot of people see across the state is there's a lot of locations where houses are being built with materials that a lot of them would already meet the requirements based on R327, as I'm sure everyone is familiar with. Low-income housing, affordable housing is an issue. So locations that are using that aren't using the hardy board and some of the materials, there is that additional cost. Something I thought would be valuable, and this actually came up in one of the presentations in the DLCD stakeholder meeting, and the name and the location that they represented escapes me, but they did some polling, and there was in general, I think it was like 70 to 80% of people were supportive and would be willing to pay an additional like up to like $6,000 to have a home that's ignition resistant. So I thought that was valuable information. If there's interest in getting that, I could ask him. I see Sadie's popped up, so maybe she has that information, but I thought that was valuable. And so the point that was made about low income housing and that it adds additional costs, that's valid. I mean, obviously there's a lot going on with this, a lot of funding out there. Making it, being able to connect funding that's available with new construction would probably be really valuable. I know VCD has some work going on for existing buildings. Maybe there could be something to where some of that money could be used to where if it's low income affordable housing, that money could be paired with new construction as well. So that if somebody has the goal of affordable housing, that cost could be covered. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanner. We have a veritable outpouring of interest in speaking at the moment. So I have Kareen up next, then Terry, then Sadie, and then Steve in the room.
Thanks. I was just wondering about where information for cost came from. I'm not sure that goes in your official report, but I think it might be helpful for people in the call to understand that. And then I was also wondering, and I'm not sure that the process allows for this, but there appears to be costs associated with building to a higher standard of construction, but there also appears to be costs to not doing that and having your house burned down. And I'm just wondering, is there any room to kind of, when you're comparing costs or working to understand what the costs of adopting this legislation are, or adopting the rulemaking that implements the legislation versus what are costs of no action or not doing the thing.
Thanks, Kareen. Just as the human that will likely end up writing the fiscal and economic impact statement, we try and take a pretty broad and sort of holistic approach to everything that could potentially be included as either a positive or a negative in terms of that fiscal and economic impact. So in terms of things like potential reduction of risk of loss in the future, that's something that even though we can't necessarily put a number on it, it's something that makes sense to mention as the part of the fiscal and economic impact. Additionally, potentially insurance premium savings as a part of this is something that we could potentially mention in there as well. So we do try and take a pretty broad approach to what is relevant to that fiscal and economic impact statement. So hopefully that covers what you're asking about.
Yes, thank you.
Great. All right, Terry, and then Sadie, and then Steve.
Yeah, that was going to be mostly just to get it on the record that there's a cost of not doing this, and I think it's quite high. And I think that we know from the last fires, some of the low-income housing was what was hit the worst. And so I think we just want that on the record that I think that it's very important for the safety of the state and for the economic viability of the state.
Thanks, Terry. Sadie?
I just wanted to follow up on Tanner's comments and let folks know that it was Deschutes County that did the willingness to pay research with their residents. They, I think, oversampled on rural residents to make sure that they had balanced information coming back, because as a county government, they feel that that's primarily who they're serving, but they did get responses from folks in urban settings as well. But they did try to take care to make sure it was a balanced representation. It was very interesting data. So there you go.
Thank you, Sadie. All right, Steve and then Tanner.
During the Labor Day fires, a friend of mine lost his home to the Beachy fire just up the canyon here. And through his rebuilding process, I sort of coached him on a lot of these sorts of issues in his rebuilding. And as we talked through that, it really did not add significant cost to his home. Plus, he also is going to receive a little bit of a relief on his insurance. So there are some paybacks. The doing nothing is not a good answer. Doing something should result in some return. I spent a lot of years working in Florida with the Florida Building Commission on hurricane and hardening of the structures. It's the same sort of thing. You know, in terms of if you don't harden the envelope, for example, and hurricanes that come through and do damage, it's incredibly expensive. And in a lot of cases with Florida, where the state has to carry the insurance, they've just had special session here in the last 2 or 3 weeks, trying to figure out how to resolve this shortfall because insurance companies are pulling out. We risk the same thing here if we don't do something to sort of protect or harden our structures. So I think it's important to consider that cost of doing nothing.
Before you move on, it's just thank you for the feedback, and please tell your friend if he doesn't know, we have a fire hardening grant program for 2020 wildfire survivors. He knows? Okay, great. Just for everyone else on the call, Building Codes does have a grant program for 2020 wildfire survivors to help them fire harden their homes, since these provisions aren't in place yet and folks don't have to do it yet. But there is really a value in doing it, particularly for those wildfire survivors. So if you're interested, go to our website, more information.
Thanks, Alana. It's possible a link to that might actually magically appear in the chat here as well. It's possible. Okay, Tanner.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll just say this real quick. National Institute of Building Sciences has some research on mitigation savings on a variety of different hazards. Wild and urban interfaces included. They estimate about a 4-to-1 benefit to cost ratio for going above the code for new construction and 2-to-1 for retrofit. That's general across the nation. I think it's probably realistically a little bit less than that here. And that takes into account direct savings for like was mentioned, insurance, and indirect community savings. So cleanup costs, insurance rate hikes, all that kind of stuff. So I'll happily provide that link, but that may be some good information if you guys don't have that already. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not seeing any additional hands up on fiscal and economic impact, unless someone wants to jump in. Okay, seeing none. This is our last issue that I'm going to jump to. And then after that, I'm going to provide an opportunity, since we are a little bit ahead of schedule. There's going to be an opportunity if you want to circle back to something we've already discussed, or if there's something that we haven't discussed that you think should be on our radar, there'll be an opportunity after this next issue to talk about that. But issue 4 is, what are the potential impacts on racial equity in the state? With any rulemaking, the division is required to make a particular note of any potential impact on racial equity in the state that might result from the new rules. The division would welcome any input from the committee on the nature and extent of any impact this rule may have on racial equity in the state of Oregon. I'm not seeing anybody jumping out to mention that. But like I said, about everything else, we have a bunch of time allotted after this. So if anybody has something to think of, or if anybody has anything that they just want to send in an email, please feel free to do that. that same rules coordinator email address that you RSVP'd to and that was in your packet, that will be open for additional comment through the end of next week, 5 p.m. on Friday the 17th. I just want to open up the discussion right now. If anybody has anything that they either thought of since we talked about one of the previous issues or something else that I think we should be considering, now's the time. Nobody's jumping out, and I will let us out early if we absolutely have to, but I also don't want to throw away time when we could be having good discussion. So I don't want anybody to feel like I'm throwing us out of the room here, but I'm not opposed to giving people time back. Okay, we got Steve here.
Pardon me for jumping ahead. Are we going to go through the proposed amendments today, or is that for another time?
We weren't planning on taking it through sort of line by line on the code amendments, but if you have stuff that you would like to talk about, now is definitely the time to bring that up.
I do, and that's the reason that we're here, if I may entertain the audience. Again, Steve Strawn with Geldwen. As we look at the proposed language, R327.2.8 glazing, we find that in this language is long sort of vexed the industry and perhaps building officials as well, in that it doesn't give you very clear direction. So before I move on, let me provide to Alana and everybody a copy of what I'm doing so you can kind of follow along. I did not mail this in. You've got one? Okay. Anyhow, what I've proposed here, and I apologize for not getting it in so that you could put it up on the screen for everybody, but two things that are sort of problematic is, one, we don't have a good definition of what a glazed door is, even though the code talks about exterior windows within exterior doors, glazed doors. So we added in a definition of glazed door, and this language comes directly from the California Energy Code. So it is existing adopted code language to be exterior door having glazing area of 25% or greater the area of the door. Typically, a glazed door will have nominally about 50% of the area as glazed. This sort of cuts it down a little bit to 25%. Not a big deal to us in the industry. Then we go on to R327.2.8. and sort of setting the stage, the charging rules here. Exterior glazing includes exterior windows, exterior glazed doors, exterior skylights, glazed openings within exterior doors, glazed openings within exterior garage doors, and exterior structural glass veneer. Moving on, then we go into R327.2.8.1, exterior windows, skylights, glazed door requirements. Basically what we're doing is adding in bullet points for all of these issues that were up in the current language, so that it's easier for the building official to understand exactly what you need. The confusion, for example, came from it shall be tempered glass, multi-layered glazed panels, glass block, or have fire resistance rating of not less than 20 minutes. Nobody could understand what that meant. Did that mean both layers of the multi-pane had to be tempered, or one layer had to be tempered, or what was it? So this clarifies all of those points. The other thing is have a fire resistance rating of not less than 20 minutes. By what standard? So I've included in there the NFPA 257, which is the test standard, fire test standard for windows. We did the same thing if we move down into doors. We've sort of prescribed what the door ought to be. It's a exterior surface of the cladding shall be non-combustible or ignition resistant material, or shall have fire resistance rating, again to an NFPA standard, in this case NFPA 252, which is a door fire test standard. If You get into a wood door, we sort of prescribe what's normal to doors anyhow. Exterior doors being not less than 1 3/4 inches thick or 44 millimeters. And if it's a raised panel door, in other words, a wood style and rail door where there's wood panels, there's a prescribed thickness for those panels. We've added in exterior door glazing must comply, of course, with the requirements that are up in 327.2.8.1. So in other words, glass has to be a tempered light. So let's see, what do we got here? It's included a fairly thorough, I believe, reasoning statement that all we're trying to do is provide clarity to the code. As I mentioned earlier, I don't believe that this will actually add any cost at all because the requirements are there. It's just now you know what you have to do. So a lot of this has been vetted in years past. Grant, who's here with me, worked quite closely with Steve Quarles from UC Berkeley as they were doing some testing back in the early 2000s. I worked closely with the California State Fire Marshal as we tried to develop this language. It's been in the code now since the 2010 edition with no change at all. This is virtually the same language that's been in the California code for 12 years now, and there's no proposed changes. So this is fairly solid, well accepted by the industry, and again makes the use of the code easier, we believe. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. I think we do have every opportunity to clarify, just not to substantively change our construction standards. I don't know, Tony, if you have any thoughts. You haven't had a chance to see the language, so we can take a closer look also and dig in.
Tony and I talked briefly about this some months ago, and unfortunately, I didn't have an opportunity to put anything together ahead of time for this. Just everything else gets in the way. But we presented this actually yesterday to the Washington tags that sit on developing the same sort of language, different numbering, but it's essentially the same. And I think it was met with pretty solid response. So
great, thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Again, Grant Muller, I just want to make one thing really, really clear in what Steve has presented. The code as written, when you talk about tempered glass as one line item, there's a comma, and then multi-layered glass, there's not an and or an or, it's just a comma. So if I'm building a window in a wildland urban interface, I'd look at that and say, well, if I put just insulating glass, just dual glass in it, I'm good. Well, it's been tested in 2001 at Forest Products Lab in California that adding at least one layer of tempered glass adds a significant amount. It doubles at least the long length of time a window is going to stand in place, regardless of the framing material. The glass is the weakest link. So I'm adamant about the fact that having language that is very prescriptive, having at least one light of tempered glass in a window is a significant increase in sustainability, hardening of the building. A patio door is going to have 2 lights of tempered glass typically. So that's going to have tempered glass in it. But tempered glass is far and away more thermal resistant to, well, thermal stress. It's 4 times stronger. But anyway, that's my.
Thank you. Okay. Anyone else about anything related to the rulemaking at all? No topic is off limits. Tanner.
I'm typically not a big talker, so I apologize and feel horrible taking so much time talking, but I just figured it would be worth kind of keeping kind of the overall big picture in mind when we're talking about all this. And that's the goal of all this is to protect the Oregonians, protect friends and family and the communities we live in. saw a lot of friends and family and acquaintances affected pretty significantly by some of the fires in Southern Oregon, and even the Lion's Head fire. This is part of an overall process with 762, along with defensible space. I just think it's really important to keep in mind that what we're doing with these codes will have an impact on communities, and it will have an impact on people. Not a lot of people died, fortunately, but work with a lot of people day in, day out that deal with loss related to fire, and it's significant. It's traumatic. You think about they just lost their house. They just lost some stuff. House is gonna be replaced. That's not always true. With Almeda and even a lot of the more frequent fires we see, it's not just stuff. It's belongings. It's family heirlooms. It's a sense of home, and I think that's important to keep in mind. That's not to say that the fire service especially is completely ignorant of cost. Housing is a huge issue, needs to be addressed. It's a great point that was made earlier that affordability is a huge issue. What I will say is what we've seen in some of the more vulnerable communities here is they were impacted the most. Some people went from homeownership to not having homeownership, partially because of the increase in prices, partially because of lack of availability of insurance. So in some of these cases, if we're taking out opportunities for people to have ignition resistant construction, yes, that saves them upfront potentially a little bit, but there will be a long-term cost, not for everybody, but for some people, and especially for the vulnerable community. So anyway, just wanted to say that. Appreciate you taking the time to provide this process and provide for input. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanner. Any other comments, questions, concerns? Okay. Unless someone has something, unless Alana is waving at me furiously out of the corner of my eye, I am going to go ahead and give you all some time back here. And once again, encourage you, if you pull an Andy, which would be me, and you think of it the perfect thing to say immediately after hanging up, we do still have that written comment period that will be extended. It will be until the end of next week, 5 p.m. Friday the 17th. So feel free to email anything else you may think of on the drive home, before you go to sleep tonight, sometime this weekend. Anything you may think of that you want to send us, feel free to send it our way. I really want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us. I really appreciate all the feedback that we've gotten. It helps a lot with our whole process. And yeah, thanks for coming out.
Echo that, really thank everybody for your participation. And I would just throw out there too, to kind of clarify on the process side, this is rule development, right? This RAC is to help us develop our rules. Then we'll go to the board and there'll be an opportunity for feedback through the board process. And then we'll go into rulemaking and there'll be opportunities for feedback there. So that deadline next Friday is really the deadline in this rule development phase before we go to the board phase, before we go to the rule phase. So even if you think of it next Saturday, it's not too late to let us know.
Thanks, Alana. All right. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Have a great afternoon.